We began our study of the Old Testament, the survey of the Old Testament, with a look at the claim of inspiration of the Bible as a whole, the Old Testament included. It does claim it, and it is either true or it is false. If the Old Testament is a collection of messages, stories of men and women who in ancient times um, uh, lived and disobeyed and obeyed God, and it is protected from error, well then that should be readily uh, apparent in the details of the narratives and the cities and the kings and all the many hundreds, indeed thousands of references to geography, to history, to events. If any of them are found to be wanting, found to be uh, questionable, if not impossible, well then the Bible's inspiration is called into question. There have been many that in the last couple of centuries in particular have called into question the accuracy of the Old Testament, its narratives, its stories, its details. And it's in that context that more people in the last 2 centuries have questioned the reliability of the Bible as a whole and the Old Testament in particular, that we see the arrival of a new science on the scene of history about 2 centuries ago. Exactly. It is now 2019, and it was at the turn of the 18th century, in the late 1700s, that a new discipline began in earnest called archaeology. Archaeology is the stories or the tales of old rocks. That's the word of old things, old rocks. And the first thing I might say is that it is a new science. Old ruins and rocks and evidences of civilizations past did not used to be of great interest. They were just old rocks. But at the turn of the 18th and the 19th century, there was a strong effort to try to locate and rediscover the ruins of the Greeks and the Romans, and indeed beyond that, the Egyptian civilizations, the Mesopotamians, and many others. And that is the focus still today, of course, of archaeology, the study of old rocks. Now, biblical archaeology, in particular, is you could say, segment of the general discipline of archaeology that focuses on looking at the places, the geography, the times, the stories that are recorded in the Bible. And of course, because the Bible claims to be inspired by God, protected by error, well, then it needs to pass a very high standard. And that's why in this last phase of Bible 1315, I've inserted what some of the few discoveries that have been found over the last 2 centuries by the discipline of biblical archaeology, archaeology that focuses directly on biblical times and biblical history. Now we're going to look at first in this lecture just a few of the discoveries that relate to Old Testament times and Old Testament figures. And we'll go ahead and take a look at in another couple of quick lectures on discoveries found that relate to the New Testament, even though this course has not focused on that. But I want to emphasize that the Bible is to be taken as a whole, not in parts or in pieces, not piecemeal. It is either from God, protected by error, or it is not. And the New Testament refers to the Old Testament all the time as if it were history, not mythology. And that, of course, is the main contribution that biblical archaeology has brought over the last 2 centuries. You and I, living in our time, have a lot more physical evidence to the inspiration of the Bible, because even small details have been proven to be true. by recent discoveries. And we'll just look at a few of them. Let me start first with a recent find that's just a coin compared to other discoveries, smaller in size, but here's one that belongs to just 7 years ago. In August 20th of 2012, in a publication, there was a reference to a coin that had been found that had kind of rocked the skeptic world, the world that even of scholars sometimes that tends to poke holes, see mostly or some mythology in the Old Testament. Israeli archaeologists on that date discovered, narrated, published accounts of discovering a coin dating from the 11th century before Christ, so from 31 centuries ago, end of the Bronze Era. And it depicted, notice, a man with long hair fighting a large animal with a feline tail. And of course, that should, if you know some of the stories, we haven't gone through all of them in our survey, of a man of great strength in the time of the judges who used his strength to defeat not only the great, powerful presences of the animal world, but also the Philistine armies with the jawbone of a donkey. The coin was found specifically near the Sorek River, which is in Israel, in the border, what once was the border between the children of Israel that had reconquered the land in the period of Judges after Joshua, and the presence still of Philistines that in the land that had not quite been extinguished. So it is from the right geographical area where children of Israel and Philistines fought. The archaeologists Shlomo Bunovitz and Zvi Lederman from Tel Aviv University do not say this coin depicts Samson killing a lion. They do see, however, that such a find as this coin proof, and I'm about to show you that coin in a second, that stories about a Samson-like man existed and were around, passed around, even minted into a coin about the time that the Bible says Samson lived and did his great deeds with the power given to him by God. So there is physical evidence beyond the literary one of the Old Testament narratives to the fact that they're circulated in that time. Even coins were made of a man of great strength fighting a lion. Here's the point, I guess, that when a small little coin like this is found in the many excavations that are going on every summer in the land of Israel and beyond, in biblical lands, Egypt, Mesopotamia, etc., when just a coin like this is found, suddenly it starts poking holes into those that say, no, the story of Samson is made up. It derives from centuries, if not 1,000 years after when he's supposedly lived according to the Old Testament. All it takes is a coin to say, well, you might want to slow down and give benefit of the doubt to the Old Testament narratives before you skeptically make fun of it. Here is the Samson coin, and you see the large feline creature with a man over to the right with long hair that is fighting him. So this is the coin that again testifies to a story about a man fighting a lion being even inscribed on a coin of that time. So this is a quick primer on the value of biblical archaeology to the Old Testament narratives and even very small details. The biblical archaeology will not prove to you and I in and of itself, by itself, that the Bible is inspired by God. But if the Old Testament, the Bible, is inspired by God, therefore protected from error. We would expect it to be accurate even in the small things, the small details, let alone in the big ones. Here are some quick statements about biblical archaeology before we look at 7 examples of findings over the last 2 centuries. Biblical archaeology provides background to the history of the Bible. Sometimes it enlarges the narrative. The Old Testament gives us a lot and covers a lot of time, millennia. And thus, sometimes the findings of biblical archaeology give us a little more background. It provides a vast amount of non-biblical material, archaeology does, to supplement the Bible's stories. The Bible does not pretend to say everything that can be said, but it does pretend to say all that needs to be said or should be said. But biblical archaeology can enlarge the picture for us. It can help sometimes those who translate from the ancient Hebrew. It can help give explanation of many passages in the Old Testament and the Bible that may be harder to understand without historical archaeological context. So sometimes it helps the translators to give us a better accurate reading of what the ancient Hebrew says. It has done, over the last 2 centuries, a lot to correct the impression that some still like to give, that the biblical stories, the biblical history, is to be doubted as trustworthy in most instances. Here is a statement that I'll read. Serious doubt has been raised as to whether men like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob ever lived, even more so as to whether the Bible characters did what Genesis said they did. Now, it's easy to question these, but because they imply not only the existence of God, but the operation of miracles and many other things like that. Really, the waters of the Red Sea just parted and a whole nation of 1 million people walked through. Do you really believe that to be true? Well, the Bible says, well, that's what happened. Now take it or leave it. Biblical archaeology has done much to discredit those who automatically question the veracity, the historicity of the Old Testament. So we'll give you some examples, but first, some disclaimers. Now, what biblical archaeology does not always do is give us what we would like. You know, for example, do we have the tomb, the empty tomb of Jesus? Question. Well, we're not sure. It would be nice if we found it. Do we have the bone boxes, the burial places of the family of Jesus? Do we have the bone boxes, the cenotaphs, the burial places of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac? Well, we don't, or at least we don't think we do. So, I mean, it'd be great that we found big things, but archaeology does not always give what one wants when he wants it. There are continuously every year new discoveries that are found, but it will not give us always exactly what we want, and there are reasons. There are still big things like the problem of the dating of the Exodus that we talked about. The fact that Moses existed and a million or more people left Egypt is not to be questioned. But what century did that happen? Well, it's not definitive. I suggested that there are 2 options, the 15th or the 13th century BC, and I suggested that the evidence speaks more to the fact that it probably happened in the 15th century before Christ. Now, that said, we also noted why there would be no old rocks to give us evidence of when this massive exile or exodus happened. And it has to do with the fact that the wandering of the people of Israel happened in a desert, and that the Egyptians had absolutely no motivation to record the loss of Pharaoh and army and the embarrassing loss of all the brick makers, which were the Jews, the Hebrew people in ancient times. They just didn't want to record such a defeat. What a study of archaeology will do is create respect, healthy respect for the reliability of the biblical story. So here I'm going to give you a few examples of where skeptics got it really wrong in the past, and what might behoove modern-day skeptics, maybe it's you and I sometimes, to go slow on questioning the historicity of the Old Testament. Here are 7 examples. Example number 1. In the Old Testament book of Joshua, during the conquest of the story of the conquest of the children of Israel of the Promised Land, after Moses had died and they came into the Promised Land, there is a list of pagan foreign people that is made, and the names in English usually resonate with the ending ites. So Perizzite, Gigazites, and the list goes on. One of the people that are mentioned, not just a person, but a whole civilization, a whole people, is the Hittites. And in the early 19th century, it became fashionable among some scholars, theologians sometimes, to say, yeah, right, whoever's writing Joshua, the book of Joshua in the Old Testament, is making up people. That's like saying, you know, the Americans never existed, the French never existed. Really, you can't make up a whole people. And they were accusing the Old Testament of making up one of them, because there was, at that time, no physical evidence outside of the Old Testament to the existence of the Hittites. They said they're just a missing people, and if the Old Testament book of Joshua can make up a whole missing people, well, then you can't quite rely on it to be a good record of really what happened in ancient times. What you're looking at below is a map. That is a map that nowadays you will find easily on the internet or in textbooks of the empire of the Hittites, because biblical archaeology helped us find not only small evidences of the Hittites, but gigantic evidences of the empire of the Hittites, which Joshua 3:10 mentioned as a matter of fact. And now we, of course, must take it as a matter of fact, because all kinds of evidences of the Hittites have been found. Now, what you're looking at is the area of the empire of the Hittites that now is defined by historians, and it's in modern-day Turkey. It occupies most of what we call Turkey and Syria, so it was a huge empire with major cities. Now, would you look in the center of the map towards the top, and you'll see the capital of Hattusha. Now, thanks to a German archaeological team, we have not only found evidences of the Hittites all over, but we have found the capital of Hattusha in north-central Turkey today. These are images of the landscape in north-central Turkey today, of the walls and the city, the capital of Hattusha, of the Hittites. So no more to be questioned is the existence of the Hittites. So that is now a long-forgotten disclaimer that some have of the Bible, the Old Testament. You can't really count on it. It makes up entire civilizations. Well, it didn't. This is a couple of more, smaller details that were found in the capital of Hattusha. It's as they didn't have writing paper, and they used clay. You'll see a large clay tablet on which, in the cuneiform language, there is a treaty between the Hittites and the Egyptians, the powerful dynasties of pharaohs to the south, and it dates to about the middle of the 13th century before Christ. So we have not only presence of their capital, but also details of treaties that they made with powerful enemies to the south. To the right, in this, you will see a picture of a riton, which is a drinking vessel, even though it looks like the head of a bull, but it has a spout, and you use the horns to pull it, lean it forward, and it's used for drinking, or it's used for pouring out libations on altars of could be wine, or it could be honey, or other materials that are poured out. So this is a artifact belonging to the Hittites that we have found. Here are, on the left, a couple of gates of the city of Hattusha. So one has lions on the left and the right of the entrance gate, one of the gates of Hattusha. Down in the image left below, you see images of Sphinx. That's an interesting depiction that the Hittites probably, possibly inherited from their contact with the Egyptians, of all things. And what you see on the right side instead is a reconstruction of the walls of Hattusha of the Hittites from the 13th century before Christ. One more image. These are details of sculptures in the capital of Hattusha of the 12 of the Hittite gods. They were a pagan polytheistic culture that are mentioned in Joshua chapter 3. That's example number one. Yes, the Hittites really did live. We now, no one questions it anymore, but probably should have questioned it in the first place. It's probably a matter of time, even though we're not going to find everything we want. The Old Testament narrative should not be questioned inherently in its veracity. Example number two is a obelisk. That's a term for a pointed, sculpted finger pointing to the sky. The Egyptians will use those systematically and will use them a lot to depict stories and artifacts, narratives of their pharaohs. And they can rise up to 80 to 120 feet up in the air. This is a smaller one, and it is called the Black Obelisk. It's in the British Museum in London, and it references one of the kings of Israel, Yehu, and is an example of the 9th century before Christ. After King Solomon, of course, the kingdom of the Hebrew people, United Kingdom, split. It became the 10 northern tribes, 2 southern tribes, and King Yehu was one of those that fell under the domination of the powerful Assyrian kings to the north. And Yehu, king of Israel, was forced to give tribute to the powerful king of Assyria. And while it is mentioned in 2 Kings 9, this king of Israel, the 10 northern tribes, on the Black Obelisk we find an image of King Yehu bowing down before the king of Assyria to give tribute. Here is, in detail, that image. There you see the typical wavy hair of the Assyrian kings, and the man that is bowing down and giving tributes to the king of Assyria is Yehu, king of Israel. That's the 10 northern tribes. They will, of course, fall to one of the later Assyrian kings in 722 before Christ. They will become, they will be overrun by the Assyrian armies. But at this point in time, they're trying to avoid that. You see, without the help of God, you're left on your own. We talked about this important concept. So, yes, when the Old Testament gives the name of a king, yes, you should probably take it for granted that they're talking about real people, because again, we have found, thanks to biblical archaeology, images of a king of Israel bowing down before a king of Assyria. The Moabite stone is example number 3. There's a reference in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 1, and then chapter 3 again, about Mesha, a king of the foreign enemy people to the children of Israel, the Moabites. There is much reference to the Moabites in the Old Testament narratives, interaction with the Hebrew people in the coming into the Promised Land, and then after in trying to handle these Moabites across the Jordan River. The Moabite stone is an inscription that talks about a rebellion of Mesha, king of Moab, which is recorded in 2 Kings, in particular, chapter 3 and verse 4. So here, one little passing verse comment about a rebellion of the Moabites against the children of Israel, rebellion because they had been under them, that is, they had been subjugated by them, and then they rebelled to them. A little passing one verse comment is given evidence by this inscription found that belongs to that time. This is a stone or stele. That's a way in which ancient cultures kept record of important events. Example number 4 is outstanding in so many ways, not only in the way it was discovered. It was discovered by a boy that ignored signs and instructions of his mother and went swimming in an underground water system underneath the Temple Mount, the city of David, just south of the city of the Temple Mount. Very dangerous underground water tunnel, and an inscription that you're looking at in the lower part of your image, was found by this boy and recovered, and it dates back to about the year 701. In a context of a siege by King Sennacherib of Assyria, the king of Judah, or of Jerusalem, Hezekiah, a good king, by the way, has to prepare to withstand the siege of a huge Assyrian army led by Sennacherib, king of Assyria. And in that process, there is a need. You can't withstand weeks or months of a siege of an army without water. And so not only access to water, but protection of the springs that feed a city are very important. So Hezekiah's tunnel is what was discovered in the late 19th century by this young boy, and a Shiloah inscription, as it's called, a record of the incredible engineering feat when the waters of the Gihon spring were channeled completely into a pool in the protection of the walls of Jerusalem, so that the besieging armies of the Assyrian king could not have access to water, would not have access, and on the other hand, the children of Israel under Hezekiah in Jerusalem could have complete access to the water, and it could not be poisoned or blocked. And this inscription tells about 2 teams of workers that had to channel through with pickaxes a solid bedrock for at least 600 feet, and without modern instrumentation, the 2 teams had to somehow connect and find each other. And this inscription is a record of the joy, the final moments when they heard each other picking through the last few feet of bedrock, and then the flowing of the water into the pool of Siloam and Jerusalem, the joy of succeeding this incredible engineering feat. The Hezekiah's tunnel is briefly mentioned as a waterworks in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 20. But now we have, and you can visit it today, you can walk into it, and that inscription is a testament to the little detail of a moment of rejoicing of the besieged city of Jerusalem as it is going to withstand the assault of the Assyrian army. One other connected item to this moment in history is the next, example number 5. Example number 5 is called Taylor's prism because it's made in the format of a prism, and it is a record, so to speak, of the narrative of 2 Kings 19. What happened in that siege of the city of Jerusalem? Well, God did step into history in this case and protect Hezekiah, a good king, and the people of Jerusalem and of Judah from falling to King Sennacherib of Assyria. What Taylor's prism is a record by the Assyrian king when he got home of what he did in his military campaign against the children of Israel. And he boasts, this was of course sculpted by the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, when he got back, to be a record of his great feats, and it boasts that he took 200 and something cities and villages of the land of Israel, and then it talks about Jerusalem, and here's the key point. Did you take the capital? Did you take Jerusalem? Well, the language that he will use is, I surrounded Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. Is the one way to translate yeah, but did you take it? And the answer is no. If you read the rest of the story, as recorded in 2 Kings 19, you will find that not only did Hezekiah's tunnel provide water for Jerusalem during the siege, but that God stepped back into history on this occasion and wiped out in one quick swoop the entire army of Sennacherib, who returned back to the capital without his army and without having taken Jerusalem. But he's not going to record that. Like the Egyptians don't record their loss of an entire people, Sennacherib is not going to record the loss of an entire army. What he does say in the Taylor Prism record is that he laid siege to Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. But then it doesn't tell you he took it, because he didn't. Example number 6, coming from the time of the collapse of Jerusalem in 587, 586, to the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. God will not step into history here, as the southern kingdom of Judah will grow unfaithful to him. So when King Nebuchadnezzar comes, Jerusalem will fall and the Jerusalem temple will be destroyed. Again, in Berlin, because having been found by German archaeologists and reconstructed in Berlin Museum, is the Gates of Ishtar, one of the fantastic gates of what was the city of Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned for over 50 years. The Gates of Ishtar, Ishtar being one of the goddesses of the pantheon of Babylonian divinities. In 2 Kings chapter 25 and 27, you have a reference to the king Jehoiakim, falling and being taken away. Of course, we'll recall others that were like Daniel in the first generation of exiles that were taken away by King Nebuchadnezzar and parked outside of Babylon. The king Jehoiakim was put in prison by Nebuchadnezzar and lay there for about 25 years until Nebuchadnezzar died. And when Nebuchadnezzar died, his son adopted a different policy with regard to this particular king of Judah. And he let him out of prison and elevated him to high position. And what was found in the excavations of the Gates of Ishtar in this area was the ration tablets. That is, what was the diet, what was given in rations to his name is either Jeconiah or Jehoiakim. Both those names are names of the same man, king of Judah, that was imprisoned for 25 years and then released and made to be able to dine at the table of the next king of Babylon. And we have even a record of what goodies, what rations he was afforded, which is an amazing detail. What you're looking at is the beautiful blue lapis lazuli covered bricks of the gates of Ishtar, one of the most fabulous of the 8 gates of Babylon that have been reassembled together. And what has been found is even what one of the kings of Judah ate after he was released from prison after 25 years. An amazing detail. A last example. In Isaiah chapter 20, verse 1, it makes reference to a king, an Assyrian king, by the name of Sargon. The problem was that when we had lists of the Assyrians and their records, that is outside of the Bible, of the kings of Assyria, there was no Sargon mentioned whatsoever. So once again, like in example number 1, we had a missing people. We have here a missing king. How can you have a whole missing king? If the Old Testament makes up kings, then it's not quite as reliable as we might think. Well, of course, all you have to do is wait a little bit of time. Now, found in museums, not only in one, but in many others, the Vatican, British Museum, etc., is all kinds of sculptures of Sargon, the supposed missing king. At least he was missing for a while until biblical archaeology found plenty of non-biblical evidence, archaeological evidence to his existence, and the reason for which he was erased from the lists that we had. He was a usurper king. He was a king that was, once he died, was erased from history. This has happened many times. In Egypt, for example, there was a queen by the name of Hatshepsut who reigned for about 20 years as Pharaoh of Egypt, but she was then erased from history as the Egyptians were not too keen on female pharaohs. But then archaeology found all kinds of evidence for Hatshepsut. Well, a similar narrative is to be found here for Sargon. Now Sargon, nobody questions the existence, and we know why he didn't appear on those lists. This is just a quick look at some of the pieces of evidence that biblical archaeology over the last 2 centuries has brought to the Old Testament narrative. This concludes this lecture.